Hello, alpha males. Welcome, and hopefully welcome back to the Alpha Male Podcast. The podcast where we talk about what it means to be an alpha male the right way, with God at the center, where he belongs. Before I get started, I just want to thank all the supporters and patrons to the show. With that, I'll put in the bio if you want to skip it. Skip the bio around 3 minutes and 45 seconds from where it starts. And I know we often talk about some pretty somber topics, but today hopefully a good, fun episode on some just cool gear. And hopefully a fun, lighthearted episode with all the craziness going on in the world. Who am I? A question we should all ask ourselves. I am, first and foremost, a servant of God, made in his very own image, a follower of Jesus Christ, a simple man called by God to the Great Commission to share the good news of Jesus Christ. Next, a little bit about my background and what God has allowed me to do and blessed me to do in life. Grew up what most would consider very poor in the backwoods of the southeastern and mid-Atlantic United States, hunting and fishing. Joined the Marine Corps at 17. Did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. So a decorated Marine Corps combat veteran. Infantry assaultman. After the combat tours, I was an urban warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. I also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. Also a veteran of law enforcement. I served with LAPD. I was a sworn peace officer, a cop for LAPD. I worked regular patrol assignments and more specialized assignments. One of those more specialized assignments was warrant service, fugitive recovery. Also had some other law enforcement roles. I am an FBI certified firearms instructor and been certified by another 3-letter government agency in a lot of firearms and training things. I've also been a private contractor, worked in the private sector, pertaining to tactics and gunfighting and protecting America from enemies foreign and domestic. I served as the commander of a tactical team to stop active shooters in a large metropolitan area. That was our primary mission, to stop active shooters, which sadly are a thing in America today. I've also been blessed to do quite a bit of competition shooting. Started my first formal competitions even before joining the Marine Corps at 17. I had won more shooting competitions than I can remember. I have competed in all manner of disciplines in shooting. I've been blessed to be a state rifle and pistol champion, West Coast regional champion. Like I said, been blessed to win more shooting competitions than I can remember. Mentioned hunting. I've hunted to put meat on the table starting when I was a child. I've also been a professional big game hunter and guide, hunting and slaying all manner of beast. And I don't apologize for that. Humbled to be the host of 3 podcasts. Simple Man Sermons, Alpha Male Podcast, and Gunfighter Life. Obviously, as things not mentioned, I've been blessed to do many other things. But, again, first and foremost, I'm a servant of God, a believer and follower of the Bible, the Word, Jesus Christ. And I don't apologize for that. With that, let's transition into today's topic. Inspector Gadget, da-da-da-da-da. That's pretty much all I remember. That was not really a show I liked, but I remember my cousin liking it, and I remember kind of the premise of it. This guy that had all these cool gadgets to get him out of all kinds of crazy situations. That being said, I am much more kind of a low-tech guy than a high-tech guy, and if I can fix a solution with a simpler thing, I generally tend to do that. On the flip side of that, I'm also not a Luddite. If there's a piece of technology or something that can make my life better, I don't want to shun it just because it's new. I try to come at those things soberly. If you guys keep up or care about the doings in my life, you'll know that I've worked some pretty big city jobs in the past, and I've lived in big cities, obviously, LAPD, and the commander of a tactical team in another large metropolitan area. But I'd much rather be outside in the woods. In fact, now the wife and I are doing a stint living off-grid, and I mean like far removed off-grid. Hauling our water up from a creek, showering, bathing in a river, miles and miles from any kind of service of any kind, as far as like even getting a cell signal. Living off-grid in the wilderness, I like it. But even there, I use some technology and some things. So I thought it'd be cool to do a list of really cool man gadgets. So some of the criteria, I thought it should be something in the last 100 years. Obviously, the printing press and the Bible is number one. Like the ability that the average person can, number one, read and write, and number two, have access to an affordable Bible. I'm looking at one right now. I have one in my wife's car, one in my car, several translations at home. The fact that the average man can read and have a translation of the Bible affordably, that is a great thing in technology. But I'm talking about more new stuff. Let's say, at least in the past 100 years of new technology for today's gadgets. Also, I think it had to primarily deal with men. This is the Alpha Male Podcast, and nothing against women. But, say a laptop is not on today's list because a laptop probably gets used equally today by men and women. And although a woman can certainly use any of the stuff on the list, I think hopefully the list is more geared towards technology and inventions and gadgets, more geared towards men. So what are some pretty cool gadgets for men? Let's start out with a hollow point bullet. That's pretty manly. If you know the Alpha Male Podcast, you're probably familiar with Gunfighter Life, another podcast that I'm blessed to be the host of. Big on guns and technology. And although what we'd call modern ammunition with a metal case and stuff predates 100 years ago, wouldn't make this list. And dum-dum bullets were right around that time. Modern expanding hollow point bullets, especially for handguns, are really incredibly fairly modern. They're kind of a mainstay today, but they're pretty modern, and really good ones are kind of exclusive to the past 20 years, and like top-notch ones, like the last generation of technology, let's say 10 years and newer. But that's kind of what brought 9mm back into the realm of being the go-to caliber, is that modern hollow point expanding ammunition has gotten so good. So that's going to be on the list. Hollow point expanding ammunition. Your Spear Gold Dot, your Federal HST, your Winchester Ranger T, all those. Really good man tech. Let's call it that. Another one. Ferrocerium rods. Now, flint and steel has been around for a long, long time, maybe eons. But a ferrocerium rod, like a good mixture of elements and steel into a ferrocerium rod, to be able to have something in your pocket to easily start a fire. Whether you're nice and dry in a cubicle, or whether you just spilled your canoe in the wilderness or in the Arctic Circle, or whatever, the ability to grab it out with the knife that you have on you because you're an alpha male and you carry a knife on you and start a fire, get a fire going pretty much anywhere. A ferrocerium rod is really cool tech, really cool man tech. And they also make, if you want to take it to another level, they make ferrocerium toggles, which is basically a small, thick ferrocerium rod with 2 holes drilled in it that you can put, let's say, on the toggle of your jacket or on your backpack or on your wife's jacket in case she's out hiking and gets stranded. It's just a really cool piece of man tech that you can have on you. It can even be covert. You could have it on your jacket almost anywhere because it looks like a little toggle you use to zip something up, and you can start a fire with it. Again, wet, dry, doesn't matter. That's really cool technology. Another one, GPS, obviously has come a long way, and if you like to do stuff outdoors, I'm going to narrow that down. My go-to one is called the Backtrack. It's made by Bushnell. I don't get any kickbacks on these guys. I take no bribes. I get no corporate sponsors or anything. But the Bushnell Backtrack I've used for years and years and years. It's small, it's light, it's handy. It's about the size of a hockey puck, but even lighter than that. It's got a lanyard on it. You put it in your back pocket, your front pocket, attach it to your belt loop in case you take a spill down a mountain or something. But how the Backtrack works, it's a small, light, handy GPS. You can save up to 3 locations on it. So basically, you drive somewhere, you get out of your car, you get a signal with the satellite, and you mark that location. So wherever you go, you can find your way. It'll point you back to that location. So you go somewhere, it gets dark at night, you get lost. It's got a light on the screen, and the batteries, in my experience, last a long, long time on that little thing. And wherever you go, it'll point you the direction back. Now, that may not be the safest direction to go back, but it will at least show you which direction your camp is, your car is, your house is, whatever. And it's the Bushnell Backtrack. They're affordable. They're maybe life-saving. And they're a really cool piece of man technology. So the Bushnell Backtrack. Another one, as a professional gunfighter for most of my adult life, you may have imagined I've done my fair share of testing out ear protection. One of the coolest little pieces of tech that I have found, the Walker Silencer Bluetooth. They're small, they fit in your ear. They're not only ear protection, but they can be amplifying. So when I was a professional hunter and guide, I would wear these. So you can wear them hunting. Not only do they stop your ears from getting damaged from gunshots, but they also can amplify noise so you can hear better, making you a more effective hunter. They're great. They fit in the ear. And since they're Bluetooth, you can listen to stuff on your phone. So you could be out hiking and be able to listen to your favorite, Alpha Male podcast episode. Download it on your phone, put these in. You could be hiking. I like to enjoy the sounds of nature sometimes when I'm in a really crappy part of the hike, trying to hike up a long, slow grade or something like that, and I just want some distraction. They're good for that. So you got your Bluetooth option, you got your amplifying option, and your noise killing option for when you have to, bust out your gun and go to work. So it does all of those things, and they're small, they're handy. The case itself recharges the headphones a couple of times. Again, when I was a professional hunter and guide, I use these all the time. They're great, especially if you're, let's say doing something where the background is really loud, but you still want to listen to stuff. They're great for that. It's just a really cool piece of man tech. They are not cheap. It took me years before I buy them, and one of the guys I respected, another professional gunfighter, had them, and I asked him how he liked them, and he said, highly recommend, or something to that effect, and I bought them years and years ago. They're still going strong. I still use them. They're still great, and just a really cool piece of man technology. The Walker, I think, Silencer Bluetooth. They're a good piece of kit. Although there's plenty of cheaper options if you're just getting them for the range that fit over your ear, like ear muffs. I don't like wearing those things all day, especially in hot weather. I mean, you're probably not going on a hike wearing those things, but you can wear these things for 8 hours at a time if you have the right, and they come with different sizes for whatever size ear you have. Assuming one of those fits and is comfortable, you could wear them for hours and hours and not really care, unlike the big earmuffs in my experience. Optics predate like a telescopic sight, what we would call a scope. That goes back quite a ways, but and battery-powered optics go back quite a ways, but we're in this kind of new era where you get other options. The solar-powered, I think HoloSun really brought this to the market. They're probably not the first ones, just like Glock is not the first polymer striker-fired pistol, but the first ones to really bring it to market and make it successful. HoloSun did something similar with the solar-powered, let's say, red dot optic. And I have had one, and I have beat the crap out of it. In fact, I got it for a training rifle to beat the crap out of, and it still has never lost zero. It still has never needed a battery. The solar power on it still works great. I was so impressed with it. It's on one of my go-to truck guns. But a solar-powered red dot optic, fantastic piece of man technology. Also, even better, in my opinion, on my go-to, like my one go-to grab-and-go rifle, the tritium fiber optic on my two go-to carry handguns that I have optics on. The Trigicon RMR, a lot of those take batteries, but some of them take tritium fiber optic, meaning they're charged in the daytime just by the sun and they're charged at night by radioactivity. And they are fantastic. Talk about kind of low-tech, high-tech, where you don't really need anything except for your environment, but really cool piece of technology. They are awesome. The Trigicon RMR, like I said, they make versions that I like, that are my go-to. They're tritium fiber optic, and they also make the Trigicon Acupoint, which is my go-to LPVO, which is tritium fiber optic. Really cool man tech. You may be familiar with this technology in the Trigicon ACOG, like I used in the Marine Corps, fighting war in Iraq. The Trigicon ACOG really brought this tech to the mainstream. It is rugged, it is reliable, doesn't take batteries. It is really good man tech. So that tritium fiber optic combo by Trigicon, I don't know if any other companies make it. They may still hold the patent on it, but that is really cool man tech. Here's another one, and they often are called NASA blankets, so I'm going to assume this is newer than 100 years. But just what are commonly called space blankets or the Mylar survival blankets. Something that light and that handy that you can literally put in a back pocket that's about the size of a wallet that can help you survive in some nasty adverse conditions. And I have used these in some nasty adverse conditions, and they do work. They're more than just a gimmick. It's not as good as a shelter. It's not as good as a shelter in a fire or a log cabin, but I can't carry a log cabin in my back pocket. The Mylar survival blankets that give you that much ability to thermal regulate in a cold environment in that light and handy a package, that is freaking phenomenal and amazing. And that is really cool technology. Those little Mylar survival blankets. And that's primarily their use, but I've used them for lots of other things. Let's say you're skinning a deer or an elk on the side of a mountain and it's just muddy and dirty and nasty, and you want to keep the meat clean. You sacrifice one of those survival blankets. They're cheap. That's another great thing about them. You know, Mantech doesn't have to be expensive stuff. You can probably get these for $1 or $2, or with inflation maybe $5, but they're not expensive. You can lay one on the ground if you just want to have an impromptu picnic with your new girlfriend and impress her with your shiny space blanket. I don't know what girls are into. I'm very blessed to have my wife. But anyway, you can lay it on the side of a mountain if you're gutting or parting out a deer, boning out an elk to fit it in your pack. You can line your pack with it so you don't get blood all over everything. They are a good waterproof thing. You can use them to collect water, to make like a solar still. You can do all kinds of cool stuff with the Mylar survival blankets. And again, they're cool tech and they're not expensive. So if NASA did in fact invent that, hats off to NASA for that, because that's a piece of, let's call it space age tech that I use all the time, or at least have around all the time in case I do need it. Really cool piece of tech. A little kind of upgraded version of that, maybe not as versatile, but maybe better shelter, is the TAC Bivy. These things are kind of in my line 1 wilderness survival gear. I think TAC Bivy might be the brand, and there may be some other brands. In fact, I know there are. But it's kind of like that in a sleeping bag. If you don't know what a bivy sack is, it's kind of like an outer layer to a sleeping bag that can keep rain and wind off. A bivy sack, we use them in the military. But the TAC Bivy is that, but whatever they use, it's light and handy. It can fit in your pocket. And kind of along the same lines as the Mylar survival blanket, a little bit more expensive. But also, if I was going to sleep out on a mountain, a little bit better to have a sleeping bag than just a blanket. So those TAC Bivies and the things like them, let's call them the solar Mylar actual sleeping bags for 1 or 2 people. Pretty cool tech. You combine those like a TAC Bivy or survival Bivy and a Mylar blanket. Again, It would fit in 2 pockets, so both your back pockets, and you have pretty legit shelter. I have made, wilderness survival shelters, and I could do it if I had to with a knife, but I'd much rather have one or both of those. That's a big step up in me being able to survive a wet, nasty, cold, adverse condition. One that Alexander Hamilton benefits from, and hopefully he will never need. But those little microchips, I don't think I would ever volunteer to get a microchip as a human being, but my dog, I'm his master. I have dominion over him. And I put those little microchip in case he gets lost, gets stolen, whatever. That's a pretty cool piece of man tech. I was just kind of trying to think of different things. If you don't know, if you love your dog, they're not cheap, but they're not crazy expensive. A microchip that goes in between a dog's shoulders. That way, if something happens, he loses his collar, he can get scanned and they can get that information. As I understand it, it's basically like a little tiny implant that has numbers on it, and that they can look up that number and it corresponds with your information so that they can contact you if something should happen. They get picked up and go to the pound. I believe the pound, whatever they call animal shelter, whatever the proper term is, puppy retreat, I don't know what you're supposed to call those places, but the pound. When they pick the dog up and they scan the dog, they are supposed to, I think, scan the dog and see if it has one of those chips. So at least your dog is not going to get euthanized if it gets picked up by the pound or something. Alright, another really cool piece of man kit. Flashlights are not that new. They're probably in the last 100 years, but that's not exactly what I'm talking about. But the small, carryable, USB rechargeable EDC flashlights. I think you ought to, number one, as a man, carry a knife and a gun. And I think you ought to really consider a flashlight as part of your EDC. I know technically your cell phone has a flashlight, but it's not as good as a purpose-built flashlight. Wife and I went on a little canoe adventure yesterday. Anyway, long story short, it was long past dark and we had to haul the canoe up on top of the vehicle. And just having that little light in my pocket, just one of the many, many times I've used it. Came in super handy. It is a really cool piece of tech. And the USB rechargeable, you literally just take a cable, plug it in, you can charge it in your car. Even when I'm living off grid, if I'm driving somewhere, I can plug it in once a week or so. And even with using it all the time, I've never had it run out if I remember to charge it once a week. And they're light and handy. And again, I take no bribes on this show. Long before I started the show, I had kind of sponsors when I was big time into competitive shooting and things like that. I got away from that. I consider that a bribe. I don't get paid by any of these companies. They don't send me their stuff for free. But the one that I have and use and like a lot is the Streamlight MicroStream USB rechargeable. They're not crazy expensive. They're not even that expensive. I've used mine quite well to the point where a lot of the finish is worn off. I've gotten it wet I don't know how many times. I've used it I don't know how many times. And it's still going strong. Still part of my EDC. I just pulled it out of my pocket. It's a good light. But not this one specifically, but any of them like that. So the little, I would say EDC size, USB rechargeable flashlights. Really cool piece of man tech. If you want something cool, that kind of combines the fire starting and the flashlight ability, something that I don't carry all the time, but I generally will if I always carry a little ferro rod on my knife just so I have the ability to start a fire. But if I'm going out in the wilderness, I'll generally upgrade that to a USB rechargeable lighter and flashlight combo. It's called a Tesla lighter. It kind of looks like, if you remember like the mad scientist movies where you got the lightning bolt that jumps from the little orb to the other thing and it like shoots through the air. Well, that's kind of what this does, and it's honestly kind of cool just to watch it. But it's what I call the Tesla lighter, and it's got 4 little prongs, and it shoots like a little lightning bolt between the 4, and it lights stuff on fire. And I have used it in the wilderness when I needed a fire. Decided to spend the night out when I wasn't originally planning on it. It works quite well. I've used it I don't know how many times to light I don't know how many things. Usually I'll just use it to melt something like the end of a piece of string that I've just cut or something like that. But I have used it in the wilderness to get a fire going, and it does work. What I use it more for is the flashlight. It actually has a decent flashlight on it and a much better flashlight than the flashlight on your cell phone. And it's about the size of a classic Zippo lighter, but it is much lighter than that. It's a lighter than that. If it's about the same size, mine's orange in case I drop it or whatever. Not everything has to be camouflaged. The one I have is orange. I think it's Frog is the brand. I think there's a couple different brands that make them. But it's a USB rechargeable lighter and flashlight. It's about that size. It would be much better if I had to use it in some kind of tactical scenario. It's not as great as like a Surefire, but much better than trying to use a cell phone light if I'm trying to clear a small area. And primarily, the cool thing about that, it's not even as good as my little small EDC light for just a light, but it is almost as good, and it's also a lighter. And again, it's USB rechargeable. So a really cool piece of man tech there. Kind of on the survival tech, man tech, the Sawyer Mini. I know the Life Straw was probably the first one to make this popular, but I've used both and I much prefer the Sawyer Mini. Nothing wrong with the Life Straw. Still a really cool piece of man tech. But the Sawyer Mini, in my experience, lasts longer and is about half the size. And it has the water bag that comes with it, which comes in super handy. And it'll attach to pretty much any water bottle, I wouldn't say any, but a lot of the common water bottle thread pitches, whatever that thread pitch is, I don't know it, but it'll attach to that. I have many times drank in out of streams with both, and that's fine if you're not in a hurry, but if you don't want to spend a lot of time near your water source, I like the Sawyer Mini to just be able to grab and go. It's a cool system. It's not super expensive. I think $20 pre-inflation prices. You could, get a Sawyer Mini. That's another part of my Line 1 gear if I'm heading out into the wilderness that day, like I plan on doing it. Now, granted, I live in the wilderness right now, but if I'm like going out on a hike and I don't know where I'm going, I'm just like, I'm going to go this direction. That'll generally make my Line 1 gear kind of a level up on your EDC. The Sawyer Minis, the fact that I could pretty much drink any kind of crappy, nasty water. I mean, maybe not if it has like cyanide in it or something like that, but any common water source that may or may not be clean or dirty gives me the ability to have water without carrying a bunch of water. That's really cool. That's a thing I was talking about, like technology that makes my life easier. Sure, I could carry 40 pounds of water, but I could also just carry a couple of ounces worth of Sawyer Mini and have gallons and gallons of water at my disposal, especially in the Pacific Northwest, where it would be hard to imagine me not being able to find a water source. Now, that's not super helpful, like where I moved from. If I'm near Las Vegas in the Mojave or in the Sonoran Desert, I may. If you're in an environment where it's long distances between water sources, yeah, you're probably going to need to carry water. But if you're somewhere where you might come across water and you want to be able to drink it, because a big killer in natural disasters, survival scenarios, is dirty water. So just take that out of the equation and carry one of these. They're light, they're handy. Anyway, the small portable water filters, again, I like the Sawyer Mini, and I get no kickbacks or anything. I've used that. I started out with the Life Straw, but I think the Sawyer Mini is better in my opinion. They're about the same price, and they're half the size. And they, in my experience, filter more water before they get clogged. Let's talk about a high-tech piece of gear. This is not really the way that I hunt, but this has really made this kind of hunting super popular. Laser rangefinders. Before laser rangefinders, unless you really, really trained a lot and understood mills and range estimation and all that kind of stuff, you were limited to, let's say, 400 yards. Even with the flattest shooting cartridge, like a 300 Weatherby or something like that, you were pretty much limited to 350 yards. Because I don't care how far somebody says the animal was when they shot it, if they didn't laser range find it, they don't really know. And in my experience, people really tend to overestimate distance. Think about seeing a deer a football field away. Now think about trying to see a deer 2 football fields away. That's only 200 yards. Trying to find a deer in thick, dense brush or something, or in a forest over 200 yards away, I'm not saying those shots never happen, but, even guessing that range is hard. The point is, before laser rangefinders, you were kind of limited to those ranges. Now with laser rangefinders and all the computers and the Kestrels and the pocket apps for ballistic calculators, an average marksman can let's say shoot an animal, even though I don't really agree with it, unless they really know where that bullet's going to go in that animal. But a lot of people hunt out 600 yards and past, and that's really due to the laser rangefinder. So although that's not the way that I like to hunt, I like to spot and stalk and still hunt, I can't deny the impact that's had on the industry and the shooting industry and long range shooting for, let's say, a person that doesn't spend his entire life pursuing that. The ability to be able to do that with, let's say, a Ruger precision rifle and a decent optic and a good laser rangefinder is really the high-tech part of that has allowed that to be possible. So laser rangefinders, as I've heard somebody else say, Leica came out with those in like 1999, and they've really kind of transformed the distances that average people can shoot at. So the laser rangefinder makes the list. Love it or hate it, that long-range hunting is kind of a thing now, and the thing that made that possible more than pretty much anything else is not the bullets, not the barrels, it's not any of that. It's really the laser rangefinder, in my opinion, that caused that to be a thing. Because when you get past like 400, 500 yards, it makes a big difference if that is 500 yards or 550 yards. You're talking about a lot of inches of drop, even on flat calibers at that distance. You've got to know that distance. You can't really guess it accurately. And again, the laser rangefinder kind of made that possible. I saved, I think, probably the best two for last. At least maybe some of the most commonly used. Paracord. We might not think of paracord as high-tech, but if you think about, 100 years ago, the thickness of rope and how strong it was and the versatility of it, a leather shoelace compared to today and how strong a 550 cord is, 550 pounds if you're talking about the legit military paracord. That's tech. That's man tech. Paracord is cool. And if you're in the prepper, survivalist community, anything like that, the military, paracord is kind of a go-to cordage. And there's a lot of tech in that little simple piece of cordage. So a 550 cord. If you want to take that to another level, I have some, not a lot, but I have some what's called fire cord. And that's 550 cord with, call it a flammable piece of tinder wick inside of it that you can use to burn if you're, say, somewhere in a really wet environment and can't find dry tinder. So that's another level up on the 550 cord tech. And they even make some, I don't have it, but that has that plus a piece of monofilament fishing line in there to fish with. That's pretty cool, and that's pretty techy. Call that kind of low-tech, high-tech, but it's definitely man-tech, and it's definitely cool. 550 cord and the fire cord, that's pretty neat. And let's say the number one piece of tech, duct tape. I mean, how often, if you're like me, do you find yourself using duct tape? I think yesterday I used duct tape to fix a mag pouch. The duct tape, the Gorilla Tape, yes, I know it's duct tape with a T, but everybody just calls it duct tape. That aside, whatever you want to call it, duct tape or duct tape, doesn't really matter. The fact is, the stuff's awesome. You probably use it all the time. You're an alpha male. You got your Bible. You got your knife. You got your gun. You got your paracord and your duct tape. You are ready for a horde of zombie chipmunks or whatever the apocalypse might bring. Bring it on. Anyway, apocalypse, apocalypti, apocalypses, whatever the plural for apocalypse is aside, duct tape comes in handy a lot. Paracord comes in handy a lot. That's why I kind of saved them for last. All of that really kind of does pale in comparison to having access to the Bible. My baby bug out bag, my bailout bag has a Bible in it. My phone also has a Bible. So talking about man tech, I didn't put like the iPhone on here. Although it's greatly changed society, I think that's probably equally used by men and women, so I didn't make the list. But something I am going to mention is the Bible app. And although I really like reading a paper and print Bible, and I really like that as my go-to, the fact that I can have a Bible downloaded on my phone so that even if I don't have service, I can have the Bible if I have my phone without it taking any extra space, and there's a bunch of different translations. If I want to say, hey, I don't really understand this passage, let me look it up in the 1898 Young's Literal Translation, which is one of my go-to versions. Let me look that up real quick and see what that's actually saying, lettera por lettera, word for word in the original text. The fact that I can do that on my phone is amazing. So if you're not taking advantage of the Bible app, it's free. I get no kickbacks from them. It's totally free. Download it. It's an awesome thing. If I could only have one app on my phone, that would be the app. Because the Bible is the thing to have if that was the only thing I could have. Anyway, with that, men, the tactical tip of the day, I have dangling from my hand right now since I pulled it out of my pocket and I forgot it was there, my EDC flashlight. Well, on that flashlight and my other go-to tactical flashlights, I have a piece of micro cord. You could use 550 cord. Micro cord is like it, but smaller. Anyway, I make a small lanyard that my wrist can fit through or that I can lash around my pinky. And for my EDC guns day to day, I don't carry a weapon mounted light. I know the super cool tactical operators that operate tactically all the time. They have their go-to Glock 19 with their weapons light. Even when I was a cop, I didn't like carrying a dedicated weapon mounted light. I just thought it made my gun too bulky and made me less maneuverable. So even if you do that though, you should still have a handheld light. On my handheld light, I have this lanyard that I made out of micro cord. You can make it out of 550 cord. And what that's for is, if I have that flashlight in my hand, I could, let's say, tuck it under my armpit or put it in my teeth and do a reload or do a tack reload or fix a malfunction, which is probably more likely than doing a reload in real life in a tactical scenario. Let's say my gun malfunctions and I need both hands to fix it. I can drop that light. It's still on the lanyard, and I can fix that malfunction, tap, rack, and then get back into my work area with my gun, get back into action, and I haven't dropped the flashlight. I can literally spin it around like I'm doing right now and grab it and have it in my hand. I don't have to go looking for it and drop it. Just a small, light lanyard on your EDC flashlight. That is your tactical tip of the day. I'm going to give you two today because I mentioned the Sawyer Mini, and one of the cool things to do with the one that's go-to if I throw it in my pocket going into the wilderness, really depends on your area, but a lot of times if you find water, it's not unlikely there's going to be fish in that water. And if you need water, you may also need food. So something that I like to do, we talked about duct tape. You take some of that duct tape. You take a piece of fishing line, tie a hook on each end, let's say 6 foot. I'm just making up a number. You wrap that around your Sawyer Mini and wrap a piece of duct tape on it. I like orange because it helps me see the Sawyer Mini if I drop it. Call that a multi-layered tactical tip. A tactical tip inside a tactical tip, if you will. But you wrap that all up in a piece of orange duct tape on your Sawyer Mini. That way, if you come across a body of water and you get some water, you may also be able to get some fish because you have fish hooks. And take that, Inspector Gadget, rolling it all the way back to the beginning. Anyway, with that, men, I am very humbled that you come here for advice, for knowledge to the Alpha Male Podcast. Very humbled and blessed to be able to do my part to make godly men strong and strong men godly. On that note, the tactical verse of the day.
Therefore, strengthen the hands which hang down and the feeble knees, and make straight paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be dislocated, but rather be healed. Pursue peace with all men, and holiness, without which no one will see the Lord. Looking carefully, lest anyone fall short of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up cause trouble, and by this many become defiled.
Notice it says many there be defiled. That's sad. Don't let a root of bitterness spring up in your heart. Think of that like a root of bitterness clinging. Whatever somebody has done to you to screw you over, to hurt you, and I've certainly been there, and I've certainly been screwed over and persecuted. I have lost both family and career for the sake of Christ. And although I don't enjoy the persecution, I count it nothing compared to the excellency of Christ. Whatever somebody has done, again, to screw you over, to hurt you, to persecute you, you're called to forgive. That bitterness in your heart is not hurting them. It's hurting you, and it's hurting your relationship with God. Let no root of bitterness be in your heart. Pluck it out. If you don't have the strength, pray to God to help you pluck it out by the roots. Whatever somebody else has done against you, remember how grievously we have sinned against the Almighty, the one who made us and loved us and gave His Son to die for us. We have sinned against Him. I would hate to recount the number of times I have sinned against God, because let's remember, all sins are a breach of God's law. For sin is a transgression of the law, and all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So, lest we forget that we need forgiveness. What does the Bible say? What does the New Testament say? In the Gospels it says, you must forgive men their trespasses, and if you don't forgive them, neither will your heavenly Father forgive you. That's what it says. So if you want to be forgiven, and we all need to be forgiven, we all sin, then you must also forgive. Let there be no root of bitterness in your heart. No matter what somebody has done to you, no matter what you want to feel, you must choose to forgive. Forgiveness is a choice. You must rule over your feelings and your emotions and choose to forgive. That's alpha male. With that, men, thanks, and have a blessed day.